Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 2023 Constitution Day hybrid event. I am Jelaine Williams, Counselor and Coordinator of Career Services and Program Coordinator of today's interactive event. Thank you for joining us. This year's theme is Myths, Misconceptions, and Misunderstandings of the Constitution for We the People. Before moving forward with the program, I have one housekeeping item. Toward the end of the program, we invite you to complete a quick evaluation survey, which will be available by scanning a QR code. At this time, we are delighted to have greetings from our president, Dr. Belinda Miles, followed by Dr. Carla DeBose, humanities professor and program moderator. Thank you again and enjoy the program.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. I think I can say good afternoon now. So good afternoon. Welcome to the fall semester and welcome to our 2023 celebration of Constitution Day. Thanks to this year's committee for planning an interactive hybrid learning experience around the theme Myths. I'm not sure if it's misinterpretations or misconceptions, but either way, I think we're getting to the same point, and misunderstandings of the Constitution for we the people. We're celebrating Constitution Day a bit early, but this gives us the opportunity to incorporate the knowledge that we gained today, not only on September 17th, the day set aside each year to commemorate the 1787 signing of the U.S. Constitution, but in every occasion where we are reminded that we, the people, possess the rights that are guaranteed to us as citizens of the United States of America. The Constitution provides a blueprint for our government and details how we have chosen to run our country. It also affirms our freedoms, protects our rights, and strives to achieve justice. Our rights as citizens are constantly being challenged. We see these challenges in recent Supreme Court rulings and state-enacted legislation, and it's the job of each of us to protect these rights, to know our rights, and to question the rights at times as responsible citizens. During a time when the value of education and the value of a college degree is being questioned, your community college education and programs such as Constitution Day, among the many co- and extracurricular programs offered, give you the opportunity to learn about and be exposed to new ideas and perspectives. College also provides multiple forums to participate in respectful discourse with those who hold opinions that may be different than yours, a necessary practice for those who live in a democratic and civil society. How many of you were able to participate in yesterday's Student Involvement Day? Were you able to go there to the Student Center? There was quite a buzz. If you weren't able to be there, please take a look at the range of co- and extracurricular activities that are available, various clubs that relate to your programs of study, as well as others that provide leadership roles for you in college governance or writing for the newspaper and other skills that can help you to build your skills to participate in a democratic society. It's our responsibility, each and every one of us, we the people, to work every day toward creating a more perfect union, one that embraces diversity as a strength, equity as a core value, and inclusion as a norm, as we demonstrate respect for the rights of all who yearn to share in this American dream. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for choosing SUNY Westchester Community College as a place to learn and explore the world around you. Thank you so much to our faculty who shepherd our students and guide them through your courses. And thank you for bringing yourselves here with the openness to learn at SUNY Westchester Community College.
Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here with you all today as we use this time to ponder, to celebrate, to critique, and to learn more about the American Constitution. I would bet that almost everybody in this room knows something about the Constitution. But maybe we don't know as much as we think we know. The Constitution was written in 1787, ratified in 1788, and enacted in 1789. It is one of the most important documents for the founding of this nation. It established a new framework of government for a fledgling young nation that at the time was facing some very real challenges to its viability, right, to its success, to its survival. The post-revolution period was a time of economic and political instability, as well as class struggle and strife. We don't often think about the Constitution as emerging from struggle, but to better understand the Constitution, we need to understand that fact. Some serving in state governments believed a stronger central government was necessary in order to sustain or preserve the viability of our nation, while many others in state government feared a stronger central government would trample on the rights of American citizens. The issue of citizenship and protection of citizenship rights has driven American history since 1787. Those who were worried about creating a stronger central government with a president advocated for protections for individual rights, and the result was our Bill of Rights. Today, we will be focusing our event on the 14th Amendment, which outlined criteria for citizenship and guaranteed certain protections for citizens. Now, our Supreme Court has reviewed, reinterpreted, and redefined the 14th Amendment, and there have been political, legal, and even historical struggles around its meaning. While we might think this 236-year-old document has no bearing on our lives today, we couldn't be more wrong. It is a living document that we as a nation continue to struggle over as we consider issues such as immigration, affirmative action, access to abortion, gun control, student loan forgiveness, voting rights, and many other issues. So, to begin thinking about what we know or think we know about the Constitution, I'm going to turn the program over to Dave Ahrens.
Thank you, Dr. DuBose. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, I'm Dave Ahrens. I'm Division Coordinator of Career and Technical Education here at the college, and we're going to have a great event today. But before we get to that, we're going to start you off with a couple of questions that I'd like you guys to answer. So, if you can take out your phones, for the ones that don't have their phones out, please take out your phones and scan this QR code, and the first question should come up for you. So just pinch out, and then you should get it, and then the first question should answer, and I would like you to answer that question. I'll give you all a couple more seconds here. I see people taking photos. All right. All right. What? We good? All right. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Excuse me. Technical difficulties. Technical difficulties. Here we go. The American Constitution guarantees a citizen's right to vote. Here we go. True, 25. False, 14. 26. Oh, false is going down. True is going up. True is going up. False is steady. Do we have everybody here? Do we have, what is that, 51? We have more than 51 people here. Oh, no. That's bad. If our president can't vote, oh my God.
It's a conspiracy.
There we go. All right. So I think we have it all together. And so the answer is false. The Constitution does not explicitly state that Americans have a right to vote and leaves it up to the states to decide who is eligible to vote. The Constitution states that no citizen can be denied the right to vote based on certain factors like race, gender, class, or color. That might come as a surprise to you. It came as a surprise to me. I learned about this. All right, next question should be also in your phones. Although persons convicted of a felony are unable to vote, they can still be elected president of the United States. True or false? Please give me your answers. All right. Look at those trues. Wow, a lot of truth. Okay. Trues are still leading. False is coming up. Here comes true. 3 just jumped into true. 1 jumped in. Oh, 1 more for true. Any more votes? 2 more for true. Any more? Going once, going twice. Oh, oh, whoa, oh. All right, 29. Oh, that fits. That's almost at 50, 51. Okay. Thank you, that last person that voted. I appreciate that. False. The answer is true. The majority of you got this. The only requirements for being elected president are 1, be at least 35 years old, 2, be a citizen, and 3, have lived in America for at least 14 years. Those are the only real requirements. 48 states have varying levels of restrictions on voting with a felony. Vermont and Maine and the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., allow people convicted of a felony to keep their right to vote while in prison. Some, like New York, restore voting rights once someone is released from prison, and some states, like Florida, restrict voting completely for people convicted of a felony without any guarantee of restoration. They would need governor decision or some type of extra level to restore those voting rights. So thank you very much for your participation. That's my part of the program. If any of these questions sparked questions for you, please ask the panel when you get your chance to ask questions of the panel. Thank you very much. Back to Professor and Dr. DeBose.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you show me some love? Good afternoon. That's what I'm talking about. All right, so my name is Professor Donnie Simmons. I'm director of the Black Hispanic Male Initiative here on campus. And we have prepared for you a series of edited videos from a documentary on Netflix called Amend. In keeping with the theme of Constitution Day this year, it is imperative to understand the origin state of our country, our laws, our Constitution, and in a nutshell, America. So for the next 5 minutes and 25 seconds, this video lays the foundation for this discussion.
So I'm just going to give us a quick second to digest some of that before I introduce our guest speaker for remarks today. So today, we welcome Jonathan Campuzano, who is a practicing attorney, adjunct professor at SUNY, and one of SUNY WCC's own alumni. As a staff attorney with Neighbors Link Community Law Practice, Jonathan provides legal services to immigrants. He teaches immigration law in SUNY Westchester's paralegal certificate program. Prior to Neighbors Link, Jonathan served as an assistant county attorney in Westchester County's law department in both the family court and appeals, opinions, and legislation bureaus. In 2023, Pace Law School honored Jonathan with the Rising Stars Award, which recognizes legal professionals who have impacted the field of law during the first 15 years of the recipient's area of work. Born in White Plains, raised in Greenburgh, Jonathan is the son of an Ecuadorian immigrant father and a mother whose parents migrated from Puerto Rico. He is fluent in English and Spanish. Please give a warm welcome to Jonathan Campuzano.
Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So my comments are focused on citizenship and immigration law. And so the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution includes the Citizenship Clause, which states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. The Citizenship Clause was ratified in 1868, nearly a decade after the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision that denied citizenship to children of slaves. The Supreme Court found in that decision that the Constitution did not extend American citizenship to people of African descent. To this day, it is considered as one of the worst Supreme Court decisions. We have seen the Citizenship Clause politicized in 2008, where opponents of then presidential candidate Barack Obama questioned whether he was eligible to serve as president of the United States, being born to a U.S. citizen mother and an immigrant father in Hawaii in 1961, 2 years after Hawaii became the 50th state. To be president of the United States, you must be a natural-born citizen of the United States, so born in one of the 50 states or one of the U.S. territories. What if someone wasn't born in a U.S. state or territory, but one of their parents was a U.S. citizen? Could they be a United States citizen? They could, through either derivation or acquisition of citizenship by their U.S. citizen parent. This appears straightforward. And if one of your parents is a citizen, no matter where you are born, some way, somehow, you could become a citizen. But what about a child born in the United States in a U.S. state or territory whose parents are not U.S. citizens? Are those children citizens? More recently, the Citizenship Clause has been a hot topic regarding the children of undocumented immigrants born in the United States or the children of those visiting the United States temporarily, on a visitor visa, for example. Each year, bills are introduced in Congress attempting to deny citizenship to these children. Now, while these bill proposals are more political statements than anything, they provide some insight into how parts of the country feel about this topic. Members of Congress would not propose these bills if they felt it would jeopardize being reelected. Congress members suggest that they are proposing these bills to stop illegal immigration. They do not want people coming to the United States and have children so they could become citizens themselves. This would mean that the U.S.-born child would eventually file a family petition for their parents. However, this isn't something that happens automatically. First, before a U.S. citizen can file a family petition, they need to be 21 years old. Second, once the parent becomes a legal permanent resident, they must wait 5 years, at least 5 years, before they can apply for citizenship. also known as naturalization. Lastly, before citizenship is granted, the parent must undergo a reading and speaking exam to test their English, in addition to a written civics exam testing their knowledge of U.S. history and government topics. It is doubtful that the undocumented parents of a U.S.-born child view a nearly 30-year wait to become citizens as something viable. During that wait, they could not return to visit their family in their home country until they at least become legal permanent residents. For at least 21 years, they would live under the fear and risk of deportation. U.S. citizenship is something that is taken for granted at times and wished for by so many. The response is usually, well, why don't they enter the country the right way? Unless you have a family member who could file a petition on your behalf, or you apply and receive one of the numerous visas with narrow qualifications, there is no application for someone who decides they want to come to the U.S. And sometimes it isn't their choice, whether it's fleeing dangerous conditions in their country or a lack of economic opportunity. The U.S. passport, which can only be obtained by citizens, is accepted by all countries in the world and accepted for entry in nearly all of them. It was recently announced that U.S. passport holders would need to apply for a visa to travel to Europe beginning in 2024. Many reacted on social media in frustration that they would have to undergo such a process when they've been able to travel the world with barely any restrictions. Imagine how those trying to enter the United States have felt all these years. Most United States citizens do not realize the privileges that are afforded to them because they have been so used to them. For many, unless you are born in the United States, the American dream is exactly that, a dream. Thank you.
So if you all have questions for Professor Campuzano, he is going to join the next sort of section of our program today, which is our panel. So the next, wait for, so that you guys can all see. Okay, so we are now going to invite our faculty experts up to have a town hall style panel that we hope you all, the audience, the students, and our fellow faculty administrators will engage in with us and ask some questions. So I invite Professor Cynthia Haycock from Paralegal Studies, Professor George Kataku from Political Science and the Honors College, and Professor Gary Klein from the Humanities Department, along with Jonathan Campuzano, up to engage in what I hope and suspect will be an interesting and fruitful discussion about the Constitution. All right, so I'm moderating this panel discussion, and the first question that I want to pose to our faculty is, what do you believe are the biggest myths or misconceptions about the Constitution? What do you wish people understood better about it? And anybody can take it.
I think I will start. The first myth that I always highlight to our students is that we assume that our American system was designed for democracy, you know, and the founding fathers they have in mind what we describe as a republic, and the Constitution really came about as a result of compromises, and so we need to constantly be vigilant because it's not a script given by God to Moses, right? So we need to really constantly look at it and push And all the changes, the major ones that we know of, they came about because people actually pushed for it. Thank you.
I would like to focus on, and thank you for coming and thank you for tuning in. I know you're busy and it's great to have you here and have you interested in this topic. One of the things that I was intrigued in answering is what do I wish people knew about our Constitution? And the first thing that comes to mind for me is balance of power. And I know we teach it in all of our classes that there are 3 branches of government and each oversees the others in a system of checks and balances. But we're fed, I think, a lot of misinformation. I'd like to say it's on one side of the political aisle, but honestly it's on both. We constantly have politicians who are overpromising what they can do when they don't really have legal authority to do that. It's just an empty promise that they can't follow through with. And I've noticed on my exam that when I teach balance of power, students understand it and are clear on it. But when I ask specifics about, can the president do anything he wants to protect the people, students will say, yeah, that's true. And it's not. We've got a system of checks and balances. It's not, I think it's not that our students misunderstand it, it's that they understand it in class, but then they're fed in misinformation. So I would encourage you all to really think about the things you read or the things you hear from politicians. And if it doesn't seem right, maybe it's wrong.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right. I would say a couple of things. I'm going to say one thing from how we look at the Constitution from above, and then from what we call below, right? How you guys see the Constitution. I'll share a quick story on that. So when we think of the Constitution, you know, the founders who wrote the Constitution, one of the things that they recognized almost immediately after writing it was that it was incomplete in nature. And many of the founders, Jefferson even spoke about the idea that you know, this is going to need to change over time. Not that we're going to change the Constitution, we're going to certainly add to it, amend it, but that American society is changing. Even back in the 1790s, American society was changing. The other thing too is, you know, and I cut the founders of this country are often criticized, and you know, are they themselves, they're polarizing figures. For some, they're adorned and worshipped. For others, they're condemned. I kind of like to take a middle ground approach to say, you know, sometimes writing a constitution is like planning a wedding. You try to account for everything, but then there are certain things that, quote unquote, just happen. And if there's one thing I could tell you about the Constitution, and one of the big myths, is that many Americans assume that they have a constitutional right or that a certain thing is a constitutional practice when it really isn't. Like, even the basis of the protection of your rights, right? The Supreme Court makes a decision and says, you have this right. The principal cannot search your school locker, or the principal can search your school locker, and the Supreme Court makes that ruling. You say, see, the Supreme Court made that decision. And that's in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that the Supreme Court has a right to rule an action of government unconstitutional that would violate an individual's right. Okay? That was established by a legal case that some of you had to study in American history called Marbury versus Madison. Ugh, okay? But that was a power because the Supreme Court, many students don't realize, and many Americans don't realize, is that the Supreme Court was not designed to be very powerful. Nobody wanted the Supreme Court to be that powerful except members of the Supreme Court. So I think what has happened as a result is something that's infused in many of you, and that is that you really, really care about your legal rights. Americans, I've traveled the world, Americans are the most litigious people in the world. We love people's court, Judge Judy, Judge Janine, Judge everything, right? And I once had a student who really didn't like American history, came to class always asleep. One day I'm driving into school, I see a police officer had pulled him over right at the entrance of the school. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. Police officer goes over to him, I pull alongside, and the police officer says, "Can I search your vehicle?" And this student, who was barely awake in my class, immediately pops up and says, "I'm sorry, officer, that would be a violation of my Fourth Amendment search and seizure rights." You go to other countries and you ask them about the Constitution. When I was in Mexico, I had a tour guide. I said, "Show me the Mexican Constitution." The tour guide said, "There, the Constitution is over there." And he was pointing to a Mexican police officer. So one of the things that we really learn about is that we worship the Constitution. Okay? It's seen as a sacred document for many Americans, and don't assume that to be the case in other societies.
The misconception that I would point to is generally we hear the term illegal immigration, so it sounds like it's a criminal matter, it's a crime. However, the government handles deportation proceedings as a civil matter. And I note that because right to counsel is guaranteed in the Constitution, but only for criminal matters. And so all of the individuals who are facing deportation proceedings are facing them without an attorney. And so to imagine filling out most of the time an asylum application, it's about 12 pages, not having an attorney most likely will result in your deportation. So that's one of the misconceptions that I would highlight, is that with immigration proceedings or civil proceedings in general, you aren't guaranteed a right to an attorney. The right to attorney is only in criminal matters.
I just wanted to follow up on something. Do you all know the difference between a republic and a democracy? Mr. Kataku, could you just differentiate for students the difference between a republic and a democracy? Because I think in some ways it ties together all of what we are talking about.
Right. So a quick summary. Democracy was invented by the Greeks, Athenians, and it was this simple political system where you have to go as a citizen to represent yourself. And so theirs was a direct democracy. Now, it ended up becoming a mob rule, because you have people who can actually mobilize the citizen for one side or the other. For example, should Socrates be murdered or sent into exile, those who can make a very convincing case will get their way, right? And so when democracy finally ended, it became extremely discredited. And when the American founding fathers were putting the state together, they avoided using that word. Right? They probably will be shocked that around the world people see this as a model of democracy. There is a Yale professor called Dr. Dahl, died recently, moved to Columbia. He said we should call it polyarchy. Right? We're on our way towards democracy, but not there yet. Because that Greek democracy would ensure that if you're a citizen, the power rests with you, so the power of the people, right? But now we use indirect democracy, which is the Roman, ancient Rome. They create a republic, you will be represented by somebody. In other words, you give your agency to somebody to go and act. And there's a whole lot of problems with that, because you may end up hiring a very incompetent agent. And there's nothing you can do until 4 years or 6 years or 2 years. Right. So they avoided this. They created a system. What they were terrified of is to concentrate power in a single place. And I think Professor told about the checks and balances. Right. So the republic is a completely different arrangement. And democracy is something we're working towards, where if you're a minority, we have a protection. Although majority is ruling, there are mechanisms for protecting minorities. And people have a say, right? And we are working towards that. We use the term loosely, but I don't think we should get this idea that America has this intention. Final point on this, Carla. I was with students in Cambridge University and attended a preliminary session, and the person was raging against the state and said, we've given all our agency to something we call nation state, and we are doing the same thing to AI, right? That we are not acting on our behalf. The state is doing everything. When we talked about the 14th Amendment, every one of the provisions we are enjoying, we went through this struggle to get it, right? The state will not hand anything to you on a silver platter. Civil rights, all those things. So it's a struggle constantly, compromises, cooperation here and there, sometimes violence, sometimes you see nation comes together as a result of a shock or a corruption scandal, and eventually we move forward gradually. And so that's why I keep saying that we shouldn't worship the script. Some scholars call it textual fetish. We have to really drill down, know the Constitution, and make it work for us.
So that's going to transition us really nicely into my next question, which is about the impact of the 14th Amendment historically. What's the importance of it historically, and what's the importance of the 14th Amendment now in 2023?
Well, historically, as we saw in the excellent film, the 14th Amendment was designed to prevent discrimination on the basis of race. We've extended those concepts to protect other things, such as right to marital privacy, right to same-sex marriage, LGBTQ rights, and I think that extension is really an important advancement and something that we should all be invested in as the vitality of the 14th Amendment pushes us onward.
I told my classes that when because the 14th Amendment is the one that actually confuses, I think, most students and most Americans, and may I say most faculty members like me the most. But basically, you have to see the 14th Amendment as kind of the glue for all of the other amendments. It kind of, if you have your rights violated in some way, shape, or form by any agent or agency of government, 99.99% of the time, when you go to court, you're going to be suing, identifying the 14th Amendment in some way, shape, or form. Because if your free speech rights are violated by the local government of Valhalla, you're going to be suing on the basis of the First Amendment via the 14th Amendment, that kind of thing. So that glue is really important. But the 14th Amendment is incredibly unstable. And the reason why it's unstable is because it was originally designed as a very, very narrow amendment for a very, very specific purpose, and that was to protect the rights of black people after the Civil War. The irony, and the tragic irony, of the 14th Amendment was that the group that it was designed to protect the most was actually left out on a limb. Whereas if you take a look at Supreme Court decisions involving the 14th Amendment where rights were protected, they were usually, at that time in the late 19th century, protected, for example, corporations from paying state income taxes. So because of that, there's a huge debate among the legal community, and I'll leave it to our lawyer to comment on that, as to what the scope of the 14th Amendment should be. And you'll see a lot of legal minds who will make the argument that say things like, what does the 14th Amendment have to do with somebody's right to obtain an abortion? Okay? Because that wasn't the intent of the 14th Amendment. And so when you watch some of the, especially when there's a Supreme Court decision made and they have like the panel of talking heads talking about these things, a lot of times they'll always talk about what is the purview of the 14th Amendment? Is the 14th Amendment even applicable here? Okay? And because of that, it makes the interpretations of the 14th Amendment very volatile. So that's why you see Supreme Court decisions overturning previous Supreme Court decisions. That's one of the reasons why you had a Supreme Court decision overturning the previous Roe versus Wade abortion decision. So just kind of bear that in mind, but I'll let the legal expert take this one. Here we go.
Yeah, so in my work as an attorney, I have dealt with the 14th Amendment, and mostly with due process. Because specifically where I work in immigration law, and I mostly handle deportation proceedings. And so when I'm before the immigration court, if we don't get the decision that we want, and if we go to the Board of Appeals for the immigration court and we don't get the decision that we want, if we can find a way where we can show that the judge did not correctly apply the law or something along those lines, we're going to appeal on the basis of due process. And say that the laws were incorrectly applied when they were at trial, and so because of this, the circuit court should be overturning the decisions of the lower court. And so this is where today, or in all of these years, the due process is how we use it in legal arguments.
I will highlight the positive impact of the 14th Amendment. Scholars divide the evolution of American republic and democracy in two parts. So the first founding started with 1789, when we have the Constitution ratified. But the second founding actually started after the Civil War. So we have a series of amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th, that scholars, political scientists, historians called it the second founding of America. And the 14th Amendment is really going to introduce the democratic elements that we've been talking about, right? In other words, recognizing a huge proportion of the population that had been denied citizenship, right? It wasn't the end of the matter, but it really set the stage for a new United States of America. The negative aspect of it has been implementation. For example, one of the aspects we don't emphasize is if a state decides to deny citizens the right to vote, they must lose the congressional seats, right? And it's in the 14th Amendment, but they never enforce that. Right? And so you see all these things that are coming up to deny people the ease of voting. And 14th Amendment could easily be used, but we don't.
So just to think about some conceptual framing, right, as we talked about it, we can understand the 14th Amendment as helping us to move from republic to democracy, but also it's not written in stone, right? It's subject to interpretation and review and reinterpretation. But really the tool that has been used, if we think about like social justice post 68, like that has been the tool that has been used to really push forth social justice movements and make our republic much more inclusive, right, as we move towards democracy. I saw a hand, Dr. Fortune.
Thank you, Charles. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to ask the panel, specifically for Professor Klein, but also Professor Kennicotte, because you mentioned the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And I just want to know what you think about the justices on the Supreme Court, Scalia, rest in peace, and Thomas, who look at the Constitution as it was written originally and not as a growing living document. So what do you think about that? Because clearly the amendments show us a growing document.
Don't worry, I got this one. Here we go. Yeah. Whenever the president, whenever there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court and the president nominates someone, and you watch the TV coverage, they will usually have a couple of legal scholars who will say, the new nominee Professor Kedeku is a loose constructionist or a strict constructionist or an originalist or a living constitutionalist. I'm going to give you my opinion on all this, which is shared by a number of political scientists. If you ever hear those terms, okay, I know it sounds fancy, but these are all justifications for a nominee's political point of view. So Professor Fortune mentioned a man by the name of Anton Scalia, and Justice Clarence Thomas, and they describe themselves as originalists, okay, meaning that we should really look at the Constitution and interpret it in such a way as if the way the founders of the country would have interpreted. Now, if you ever hear anything like that, okay, they really don't believe it. And here's why. Sometimes you'll have a certain set of political views. For example, how many of you believe that the Constitution guarantees the right to bear arms? Okay? Right to bear arms. Okay? And how many of you think that, you know what, that means that state and local governments shouldn't pass any type of gun control laws, okay, that's bad, okay? Well, let me give you an idea. If you take a look, if you use the originalist interpretation of the right to bear arms, very, very few people in this country would be allowed to own a gun. Because the founders, when they thought of the right to bear arms, they weren't thinking of, hey, the streets of New York are really dangerous here in the 1790s. Those criminals are going to try to attack us, so let's make sure we have a pistol. Okay? The right to bear arms was a politically motivated amendment to, just in case there was the potential of a dictatorship. And it wasn't the right to bear arms for so much for an individual. It was within a collective of having a bunch of people whose government was oppressing them to get together and go to a local armory to get a gun in case a dictator was trying to take over. So that was the originalist interpretation. Okay? And this, by the way, is not only on what we call the right wing of American politics, but it's also on the liberal left wing as well. For those of you who are old enough to remember the 2000 election with George W. Bush and Al Gore, the Supreme Court basically in that very, very controversial election, which came down to the vote in one state, in Florida, came down to a Supreme Court decision which basically halted the election, which basically ended the election in favor of George W. Bush. What is very interesting is that if you read the Supreme Court decision, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late Supreme Court Justice, actually was citing the doctrine of states' rights, the same doctrine that had been used to oppress black people for years, saying that the 14th Amendment didn't apply because states' rights were more important. So one of the things I want you to see is that oftentimes these interpretive prisms, like originalists, living constitution, are adopted by Supreme Court justices because, generally speaking, they coincide with their political points of view. But when they don't, they ignore them. There we go.
Dr. Fortune, I think I would take a slightly different take.
Wait, I want you to be on the Supreme Court.
Right. and that is looking at it in a positive way from Thomas and Scalia. From the academic field, the whole argument is that history matters, right? And context matters as well. So to what extent should they take history into account? And so the originalist would say, we have to take history as part of it. But the problem comes in when they have to make a choice of which history they want to put the emphasis on. And so recent case where we're all shocked the way they voted on voting rights, for example. We thought they were going to go against it. Clarence Thomas gave a completely different account of the historical context. Right? So it's as an intellectual exercise, it's not a bad idea for you to know the context, the history, when they were putting this together. But as Dr. Klein said, it's informed by my political views, which type of history I want to tell, the narrative part of it. Right? And so it's not consistent at all. You can use the same doctrine and you pick the history from a different point of view. But generally speaking, there's this idea that for a constitution to work, you have to take a context, the future, a whole lot of things into account.
So I'm just going to transition us to our last question because I want to have some time. If students have questions, my last question is about voting. Right? How does voting impact these issues? If the Supreme Court is interpreting, right, the ways in which the 14th Amendment can be applied, then how does voting, right, we don't elect Supreme Court justices, how does voting impact these issues?
Well, I think at this point, voting has a huge impact on these issues. I mean, we've had the example with the Dobbs decision, the decision striking the Roe versus Wade case that gave a federal right to abortion. What happened in that case is the power to rule on abortion was returned to the states, which means the legislature in each state is able to enact a law and puts your vote much more directly influencing what might happen there. So I think we're in a period where voting is really critical, as is reading the newspaper or reading news from both sides of the aisle and then using the critical thinking facilities that you're developing here as college students. I mean, you are the educated public. And so if something doesn't seem accurate to you or doesn't seem right, or a politician's promise seems exaggerated, trust your own judgment, research that a little bit, and then vote.
As I pass the mic, I'd love to ask our honored speaker about this with the issue of voting. There are some communities that have proposed to extend the vote in local elections to legal residents of the United States who might not be citizens. Just wondering if in your answer you can comment on that as well.
Sure. And so with voting, how it can impact is you really want to vote for candidates who at least closely align closest with your own views. And it isn't just at the federal level, it's at the local level. It's whether or not you have someone who's bilingual at a polling station. Who you elect to office can impact how your local voting situation occurs. New York City is where that's where it's been proposed about allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections. I think specifically with school board elections, those type of issues, non-citizens, they're sending those children to those schools, so should probably have the right to be able to vote. I know it gets complex. I know it's a complicated issue. But at least in those situations, it's the same thing where those who are non-citizens, they pay their taxes, they pay sales tax, they pay all type of taxes that don't go into account in day-to-day life when viewing those who are non-citizens. But yes, voting for the candidates who closest align with your political views can impact then who gets selected to join the Supreme Court. And you don't know if you'll have the candidate will have the ability to put forward one candidate towards the Supreme Court, or if they'll have 3 or 4 in a given cycle. And so it's not a risk that you want to take so that you can have a candidate that's closest to your ideals.
end our panel portion because we have some really important, valuable resources coming up for students, faculty, administrators, and staff. So I don't want to jip the time that we have left over, but if there are questions, please, you are in classes. You have a question? Okay. I don't want to stifle the students. Do we have? Okay. I want to hear you. I'll repeat your question.
Thanks for the panel, but it was mentioned that in our government there's separate checks and balances. And I think the question I'd like to pose to the panel is regarding, I've noticed that the previous discussions at the Supreme Court actually doesn't have a code of ethics that they follow. So I was wondering, what are some of the checks on the Supreme Court and from the Constitution, but also how could it possibly be changed?
So the question was about checks on the power of the Supreme Court, since there's no code of ethics that really governs, right, the ways in which Supreme Court justices decide, right, on legal issues.
I'd say something on the history of it.
Okay, let's start with the history.
So right now there's a big controversy involving potential conflicts of interest and unethical practices on the part of certain Supreme Court justices like Clarence Thomas. One of the things, and what's very interesting is that there is no extended code of ethics for Supreme Court justices like there are, for example, for members of Congress. And you're probably wondering, wow, that is just so wrong. These people can get away with so much because these Supreme Court justices are so powerful. But in actuality, one of the historical roots of that was that the founders never intended the Supreme Court to be powerful. So why have a big code of ethics when the Supreme Court's biggest decisions that under the text of the Constitution were not that great, like solving disputes between two states as opposed to your actual individual rights, okay? That doesn't come until later, and it's a great idea to have, but understand the historical context of it.
Well, I think that's such a good question. And, you know, if you've been following that debate, you know that there have been different solutions proposed. Should Congress enact a code? Should the court come up with their own code? If you're an attorney in New York or in any state in the United States, there is a code in place that you have to follow. Each state devises the code for the attorneys within its own state, but there's a lot of, they're very similar. The American Bar Association promulgates a model code of ethics that most states follow with a few changes. But there's nothing like that model code that the Supreme Court has to follow. And the real question right now is, should there be such a code? And if so, who has the power to create that code? I think the assumption among the bar is that the court should come up with their own code, and in fact that they've had a code, they just haven't really been transparent about it. You know, it's an interesting question. It's one of those developing questions. I'd be interested to hear what Professor Campuzano has to say on this topic as well, because you know, I think we don't have an answer right now.
What's your 2 cents?
Yeah, I mean, in general, just growing up with friends and family, the stereotype is that attorneys are sneaky and don't follow any type of ethics. And so I think a code of ethics would definitely benefit the Supreme Court, just given what we've heard about what's happening outside of the Supreme Court with the justices. So yeah, so I agree with a code of ethics for the Supreme Court.
I'm afraid I'm taking the opposite position right now. I think I'll go with Justice Roberts' point, right? Justice Roberts' point, they do have internal codes they follow. If you allow the Congress to come up with codes, then you're compromising their independence, right? And we also have informal codes, which is the norm, the normative aspect. You know, it's a stain on the court if members are not being respected by the public. Right. So I think that Clarence Thomas, we're able to judge him because of the high bar we set for him. And now he's coming under, he's disclosing more. Right. So we don't have to be always have express rule. There are informal institution norms that can really constrain the judges. And I prefer that approach than Congress coming in and saying, this is the way they have to behave all the time. And the way humans are, we will react to that. They will react to that in different ways as well, right?
Just one more comment on that topic. There's a catch-all clause in every code of ethics that says lawyers shall avoid the appearance of impropriety. And the justices are lawyers, so I think, in many respects, that would apply to the Thomas situation. Has he avoided the appearance of impropriety? If he has, then he's not made a mistake, and if he hasn't, then some correction should be made.
And so real quick, that issue, the appearance of impropriety clause, sometimes when you get a job in the future, that will be part of your contract. And for those football fans, the Las Vegas Raiders have to sign that. They can't appear in casinos seemingly to advocate gambling.
So I just want to thank the panelists, but also point something out, right, that among experts, we don't always agree, right? And there are ways to articulate our different sort of informed perspectives in a way that is generative, right? And that is what we want you all to engage in the classrooms. So I thank the faculty, and I'm going to turn things over to one of our librarians.
Now, don't you just feel so smart? You should. And this is why you're here. This is why you're in college, to learn. To learn. You're not going to get this anywhere else but in an institution of higher learning like this. So next up is my son, who's going to talk about library resources.
Appreciate it, Pop. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing? That was a little bit weak. Can I get that one more time? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. That actually made my day. Perfect. All right. Okay. Oops, sorry. So I know we're limited on time, so I'm just going to make this real quick. I'm Professor Don Simmons Jr., as my pops mentioned, and I am the Information Literacy and Student Engagement Librarian here at WCC. Now, before I cover the Constitution Day Research Guide, which is the reason why I'm here, I would like to give a huge shout out to the, oh, there we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, okay. So before I cover the Constitution Day Research Guide, I would like to give a huge shout out to not only the Constitution Day Committee, who have worked hard to arrange this event, but I would like to thank the panel for an amazing discussion today. And as you have just experienced, there's a lot of heavy topics that we covered today, and especially as it pertains to the intricacies of the Constitution and how it affects us all. What matters most about today's Constitution Day event is its purpose. Today's purpose is not just to take this information and to move on, but rather actively apply this information and to use it in your day-to-day life and to become more informed as you as residents. And as an information literacy librarian, my primary responsibility is to teach you how to access, evaluate, and apply information. And in this case, the research guide I'm about to show you all will offer a plethora of library resources that delve deeper into the topics discussed in today's event. These resources include scholarly articles, academic videos, and other digital references that you can use to amplify your understanding of your constitutional rights, the democratic process, and the Constitution. So again, this quick little show of the research guide, I'm going to make this really quick so it's not like a Snoresville event. So I'm just going to first, can everybody hear me? Awesome, cool. So I'm about to go to Google real quick, see if this works. All right, Jose, I'm just going to have to exit out real quick. All right, so we're here at Google, right? The way in which you can access our library website, which is where the research guide is on, is by typing in WCC Library right here. And what's really cool is that when you type that in, the first link that pops up, Westchester Community College Library, that's us. So the next step is to go to research guides, and there's a couple of ways in which you can access the research guide, but to me, the best way, oh, look at that, Constitution Day. So you type in Constitution Day, you hit search, okay? You click on the link, all right? The first thing you see, wait, who's this? Oh, that's me, that's me. So you see me, you have my contact information, so if you have any questions about the guide or anything research related, you can contact me. But to cover the sections really, really quickly, the introduction gives you a brief overview on what the guide offers, but it automatically takes you to the 3 branches of government. And when it comes to this video in particular, Crash Course, this is an amazing academic YouTube channel. Each section is going to provide not only an academic YouTube channel, but different videos, different documentaries that cover each section in depth. But as much as we love videos, there are a bunch of links in each section that are attached to federal sources. So resources that talk more about the Articles of Confederation, the Federalist Papers, all of these are from not only the Library of Congress, but the National Archives. And then when you scroll down, there are rich literature that we have in our library collection. You'll notice the call number, okay? So you can ask one of the librarians, like, how can I get this book? I have the call number. They can take you to the book. But we also have the ISBN number, so you can look it up automatically if you want to as well within our catalog. But off to the left-hand side, you have articles from our library databases. This is different from textbooks or reference-related materials. This is scholarly, peer-reviewed information. This is good stuff. This is scholars across the world talking about these subjects, especially the topics that were covered today, but they're covering quantitative and qualitative research that go deeper into these subjects. All right? So that was for just the U.S. Constitution. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I said initially the 3 branches of government, that section was the U.S. Constitution. This covers the 3 branches of government, right? And it operates similarly. You have the 3 branches of government here in this lovely graphic provided by USA.gov. Below, an amazing video that covers our democracy. Again, similarly, below you have your literature that's available in our library collection. And then off to the left-hand side, for each branch, you have scholarly and federal sources that cover these topics in deeper detail. The same goes for the Electoral College. I don't know about you, but Vox is one of the best news media outlets out there. They lean left, but at the same time it covers really in depth what the Electoral College is, but how it affects us, not only in our country, but how it affects us in our day-to-day. And you already know, same setup. You have your federal resources, your library resources, and not only scholarly articles, but then you have popular articles that have a lot of important references that you can cross-reference if you want to learn more information, okay? Voters' rights. This is one of my favorite. Well, it's my favorite because it's the most informative. It's a little grim, but it covers really in-depth voter suppression, gerrymandering, all of the things that you see on politic news outlets, on TV, on TikTok. You have this Vice News video along with this Netflix documentary that covers in detail. And again, you have your resources below. But one of the most important sections of this guide is at the very bottom, because this is going to show you step by step, if you haven't already done so, how to vote, especially how to vote in New York, okay? So above, it talks about overcoming voter suppression, but this is the video to check out more than anything, okay? So again, we want to make sure that we take all of the information that we learned today, apply it, and to become much more knowledgeable with every subject that we learned, and to raise our critical consciousness. Sounds good? All right, perfect. So now what I'm about to do is I'm about to go back to the presentation, and I'm going to pass the mic off to Professor Williams. Give it up.
Make sure you check out the library resources, lots of information to support many of what was discussed through the panel. So let's give the panel a hand again, and thank you to our special guest, Attorney Campuzano. Okay, thank you.
Just lost my second pair of eyes, but that's okay. I'll wing it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for being here, and we're not going to hold you too much longer, only another 6 minutes and 7 seconds, right? So this last video, there are some images that are disturbing, but we need to see. And we need to see it because we need to learn and grow and educate ourselves with regard to from whence we came to where we are right now. And it's pivotal because you're the ones that are going to be carrying the torch for tomorrow. We're going to be sitting back, smiling, seeing you herald this new America, okay? Because that's what you are. That's what you represent. But it's a great responsibility. So without further ado, Jose? Special, brother. Okay. Yeah,